Hello and welcome to the On the Couch podcast, the podcast that gives you the view from the therapist chair. I'm your host, John Dennis, a licensed professional counselor. You're listening to OTC episode 36 with Schuyler Cunningham of the Cancer Trauma Project. Welcome back for another episode, OTC listeners. Thank you for joining me for episode 36. I'm going to be taking a break from all the coronavirus stuff. Got to be honest with you. I imagine if you're like me, you're kind of coronavirus and quarantined out. And I know that obviously it's a huge topic. It's a huge issue that needs attention. We need information on it and content, whether that's coping skills or, Baby Shark teaching us how to wash our hands or Dr. Fauci or things like that. All of that has a place. And I've had an opportunity throughout the last couple of weeks, I would say, to be on a couple of different podcasts and talk about my experience as a practice owner. And that, like I said, it definitely has a place. But with the On the Couch podcast, I wanted to kind of take a break from all of that. Again, I know everybody has had their stories, their hardships, whether that's being laid off or being on the front lines or things like that. And it's just so exhausting. So I wanted to kind of take a step back from that and not focus some podcast episodes on that and bring some interviews and some information on other topics, because let's face it, yes, COVID-19 has pretty much brought most of the globe to its knees, but at the same time, the rest of life keeps going. Earlier in the week, in our family, we had a washer die and a water heater go. And, obviously people are dealing with getting food and groceries and things like that. Again, life keeps going on. And that's part of why I wanted to bring this episode with Schuyler Cunningham from the Cancer Trauma Project, because cancer keeps going as well. There are people out there that are dealing with that and immunocompromised and, waiting for scans to come back or just receiving a cancer diagnosis. And that's such a huge thing. And that's why I really wanted to get a chance to talk with Schuyler when I found out what he does. I've talked before about, cancer being a cause that I care a lot about because of my brother passing away and dealing with cancer. And it's just such a huge thing. The impact that diagnosis can have just on the individual person that's receiving it. I mean, not even getting into the family, the friends, the impact that has on an entire, family or network of people. A lot of Schuyler's work really just focuses on that individual person that is dealing with the cancer itself. So I'm really excited to bring this to you, and I hope this helps somebody. So just a little bit about Schuyler before we jump into the episode. He's a licensed clinical social worker and an OSWC, which you'll hear him talk about in the episode a little bit. He's an award-winning social worker and researcher who has extensive experience that includes the Washington Cancer Institute, the DC Rape Crisis Center, the National Institutes of Health Clinical Center, and the Washington, D.C. Center for Neurocognitive Excellence. He has a master's degree in social work from Catholic University and is currently the director for the Cancer Trauma Project. I have here on the Couch podcast with me today, Schuyler Cunningham. Can you kind of give me the official in terms of oncology social work, Schuyler? What is the official term?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me. So I'm Schuyler Cunningham, and I have besides a license to practice social work, I also have a OSWC, which is an oncology social work clinical certification.
Awesome.
And it's a cool certification, and it's important for oncology social workers to have that if they're eligible for it.
Sure, and we'll definitely get into that as we get going. So, I'm so excited that we were able to finally get this together. The name of your practice is the Cancer Trauma Project, and can you kind of just give me the rundown on how did you get into this line of social work?
Yeah, for sure. So when I was studying about, I guess, 10 or so years ago at Catholic University in their social work program, my second year internship was at the Washington Cancer Institute. And I wanted to do that internship because the intern supervisor, Miriam Ratner, is known in the community as being excellent. And she also has a really interesting sort of mind-body approach and a trauma-informed approach. And so being in a hospital system, working with doctors and nurses, social workers, chaplains, the whole interdisciplinary team really appealed to me. And so I it's actually a quick, funny story. I actually showed up to my interview with a fever because I really didn't want to reschedule the interview. Wow. And I had to sit on the bench outside for a second and take a sip of water and then go in and do the interview. I told Mimi that later, and she kind of slapped me. But I got the job, and here we are. That's right. But you shouldn't go to the hospital if you have a fever. So,
yeah. Did you end up getting her sick, or?
No. I got no one sick. Honestly, at the end of the day, I think it was just anxiety.
Okay. Yeah. Well, so the role with the Cancer Trauma Project. So what is it today? What does that practice look like?
Right now is we're focused on getting the word out essentially about cancer-related traumatic stress and people who experience cancer-related traumatic stress as opposed to post-traumatic stress disorder, which can be experienced in the cancer journey. But cancer-related traumatic stress is sort of a subset of post-traumatic stress disorder. And so the idea of the project is to listen to people's stories, to share the stories as best we can, through writing them up. And we also see patients for clinical care if they'd like some additional, mental health care.
And so how do people reach out if they wanted to share their story? How do they connect with you in order to do that?
Project.com or cancertrauma.com. Actually, cancertrauma.com is the website. And we have an online, we have a form there that either people can email us at contact@cancertrauma.com or just me, Schuyler, at cancertrauma.com.
Okay.
And we can send them a screening form. And then once, because some people contact us and they're interested and they might be caregivers but might not have had cancer themselves. So right now we're just focusing on people with cancer, and we go through the screening process, and then we take it from there. People can do online. They can answer the questions online. They can do over the phone interview, or they can come in and visit with us, or they can do any of the three together.
And is this specific to the DC metro area, or this is throughout the continental U.S.? Yeah. What are the parameters?
English, essentially. At this point, I don't really speak enough Spanish or any other language to help listen to people's stories in another language. But anybody who speaks English, they can fill these out. And the reason we do it through phone, Skype, or the online platforms is so that anybody anywhere can provide their story, and they're not have to be limited to being able to come into our office.
Sure. And so if they were doing that online, it sounded like you were saying that's through Skype and similar to, just a phone call or a video session.
Try to make it really low barrier and really comfortable for people because, this stuff can be really hard to share.
Definitely. Yeah. And some of my personal background. So my brother actually passed away 2 years ago, this past November from colon cancer. So when I had, found you, through the Facebook communities with, selling the couch and things like that, that's what kind of drew me to it. I'm, since that experience have had a heart for, cancer awareness and research and kind of like you had said, getting the word out. So
awesome. Yeah. Sorry to hear about your brother, obviously.
Thank you.
Fight CRC, the colorectal cancer group, is a really great organization that I've been working with for a couple of years now. So just check them out as well. They've got a lot of great resources.
Okay. And I mean, I'm
at least at this point, I'm comfortable on my end. I don't know if you would want to kind of put me through the sort of the paces of, I know you were saying it's right now it's typically focused on those who are, cancer victim, cancer patient themselves. But what types of questions are you typically asking people?
A couple of demographic-oriented questions, which just helps us from a sort of nerdy research point of view understand, the types of people that are answering the questions and in which ways different types of groups of people are answering the questions. But then we ask things like, did you find your experience traumatic? And if so, what symptoms did you experience, or how long? What kind of support did you get? Did you get mental health support or not? What were the hardest things you went through? Did you share with your family or not? Did you find them supportive or not? What about your medical teams? What kind of treatments did you have? What was it like going through those treatments? All those kinds of questions associated not only with sort of the nuts and bolts of getting cancer treatment itself, but the emotional support and the psychosocial support that went along with that.
Okay. And obviously those questions can be pretty hefty. Each one of those, you kind of, rattled them off rapid fire, but there can be so much to unpack with even just one of those questions. What are the things that you've seen the majority of people dealing with? Are there common themes or threads that people are struggling with as they're navigating, dealing with cancer?
Yeah, there's a few sort of key things. Number one is that time period, number one, I guess, is when you get the diagnosis and the physician or the team walks back in and they say, well, you have cancer. Mm-hmm. And oftentimes people will experience that as a shock.
Sure.
And you can ask them, well, what do you remember after the physician or the medical team told you have cancer? And they'll say, I don't remember anything. That's all I remember.
Yeah.
I had breast cancer, I had colon cancer, I had, cervical cancer, or whatever the case is. Because they go into a state of shock. Mm-hmm. And then right after that is a really intense period for a lot of people as well. They get the diagnosis, but they don't necessarily yet have the treatment plan. And the treatment plan can take a week or 10 days sometimes to get, even longer in some cases. And so before you have that, you're just grinding, like, what am I going to do? What does this mean? What does this mean for my future, for my family, for my body, for my money, my health insurance, my job? And people can really get super stressed during that waiting period. Oftentimes, once people get the treatment plan and get going, it sort of nose to the grindstone, right? Mm-hmm. And they have a mission, and that mission is to fulfill the treatment plan, in hopes to eradicate the cancer. Mm-hmm. And once the other thing we're seeing is that oftentimes during that phase of active treatment, people don't necessarily seek they seek more supportive counseling than they do sort of deep interpersonal introspective work. And the reason is, for any clinician that's listening, the reason I would support that point of view is because to have someone drop their emotional defenses in a profound way while they're going through such an intense experience can almost be disadvantageous to them. In other words, we want them to use all of their emotional resources to get through the journey. Mm-hmm. Whatever support they need, obviously, we need to provide that as well. And then in the end, what they sort of call survivorship phase, which is usually, survivorship is defined in different ways. One way of looking at it is the moment you're diagnosed, you're a survivor. Mm. Another way of looking at it is the at the end of the last treatment, survivorship begins. Usually in the first survivorship phase is where we see people take a deep breath and sort of think, oh my gosh, what did I just go through? Yeah, totally. And then the defenses can drop a little bit more easily, and you can start to do some deeper work. So it's very common for us to see that. Mm. Another big thing we see is how hard it is on people with cancer to share with their loved ones what they're going through. It's not uncommon for people to say, well, I didn't tell my mom. I don't want her to worry. Yeah. Or I didn't tell my son or my daughter because I don't want them to think their mom is going to be dead.
Yeah, I don't want to be a burden.
Oh, yeah, that's a big one. And, I totally empathize with that. And at the same time, in many cases, it can cut off a core source of support for that person.
Oh, sure.
So, yeah, so replacing that support or bolstering that person's process can be really, really important. Those are a couple core things, we're also hearing that some of these treatments, while are life-saving in many instances, are just torture. They're torturous. Chemo, radiation, and all this other stuff, surgeries that can be disfiguring, can be incredibly torturous for people. Those are a few of the key things that we're starting to see.
Well, and yeah, I mean, just specific to that point, that idea of like you're essentially giving yourself, poison, or you're allowing the doctors, the treatment team to give you localized, poison essentially in the hopes of killing the bad stuff and keeping as much of the good stuff as you can. And do you find, I think just everyone across the board, cancer or not, we have just such thick defenses around, I don't want to stop and look at this or deal with this. I'll deal with that later. And I think that's a lot of times strengthened by the medical community. They talk a lot about you have to have a positive mindset. You have to, really keep that in the forefront of your mind, and that helps. So I would imagine that almost gets in the way of people doing that really deep work, because they're like, oh, I can't focus on the negative. I don't want to do that. Do you find that to be true?
That's really good. And I'm going to sort of take us a little deeper with that, actually, because we had a patient we were working with, and she was diagnosed with lymphoma when she was about 16. And then the lymphoma came back, and she had a bone marrow transplant. And the bone marrow transplant was extremely brutal for her. Sure. So one of my colleagues started treating her with sort of traditional cognitive behavioral therapy, post-transplant, post-discharge from hospital and everything. And this woman was working her butt off to try to get better in therapy. And my colleague came to me and said, I want to review this case with you because I don't feel like what I'm doing is working. So we met and we talked, and we said, you know what? I said, this woman has trauma exposure, traumatic stress. So we need to deal with that from a trauma-informed point of view. And this is a key point. Trauma-informed therapy is different than sort of normal therapy, as it were. And there's a couple reasons that it's different. But the reason why this was important in this case specifically was because the patient kept coming in saying, I know, like, I'm the problem because I'm doing everything you're telling me to do, and I'm not getting better. So clearly it's got to be me. And once we switched to trauma-informed therapy, she lightened up, she loosened up, she was able to deal with the distress in a way that was generative and productive for her. And about 3 months after we started therapy, she was feeling so much better. And then she was able to go back to the normal sort of cognitive behavioral oriented therapy that was helping her kind of get back into the swing of things, find a job. She started dating. She moved out from her mom's house and, stuff like that. But that really stuck with me, that like I am the problem.
Okay.
I think that's a hallmark of people who have traumatic stress is they experience the world as a dangerous place, even though there might not be any threat present, and they blame themselves for that. Sure. And that really kind of breaks my heart, and is one motivator to do this kind of work, so that people who have this experience know it's not them. It's not them, and there's a way to heal from this, the emotional side. Well,
and I think off of that, the idea of with trauma, research has shown that man-made traumas are often harder on people, like harder for people to wrap their minds around, and typically, higher, more severe incidents of PTSD. Not to say that, the natural ones aren't an issue or don't cause problems. But a lot of times, yeah, I always say with, like a broken arm, you can see it. There's a cast. You can, they show you the X-ray. Like, yes, they may show you the scans and here's the mass. But a lot of times it's this like faceless entity, the cancer, and it's a part of us. So I think a lot of people have that like, I've been betrayed by my own body kind of mindset.
hitting that right on. And in fact, people in the medical community and the academics in the literature will suggest that that's actually a reason why we can't consider cancer as a antecedent or a cause of traumatic stress. But I just fundamentally disagree with that. And I think there's a large group of people that also disagree with that. And PTSD, as it's defined, is a relatively tight, strict diagnosis. And so our interest in Cancer Trauma Project is obviously we're happy to treat people with PTSD because that's very serious. But if we think about, if we think about traumatic stress as when our ability to cope becomes overwhelmed,
sure,
we open up a much broader sense of what traumatic stress can be, what can cause it, and therefore, we're looking for people who don't necessarily meet the full criteria for PTSD, don't meet the full criteria for what we might call acute stress disorder, and find themselves in between. And so clinicians get confused because they're like, well, this isn't PTSD, this is an acute stress disorder, this isn't diagnosis of extreme stress, not otherwise specified. This is, maybe we'll just do this like coping and breathing. And while that stuff can be helpful to some degree, the trauma exposure and therefore trauma-informed mental health care, even though they don't have a diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder, can be essential in treating this.
Well, and can you speak to that a little bit of just the nuances, the difference between the CBT and trauma-informed? I know especially today, trauma-informed is a big buzzword in, the mental health field. So I think a lot of people throw that around. But for most of the public, can you kind of help them understand that a little bit?
So I think that the godfather of current trauma day thinking is Bessel van der Kolk, who wrote a book called The Body Keeps the Score. And,
great book.
It's a great book. And in that book, one of the main points here is that traumatic stress is primarily a physiological experience, and that's why it's in the body. It keeps the score, right? So if we just try to work with traditional therapies and help someone change a behavior or change a cognition or a thought belief about themselves, we're not addressing the physical somatic experiences that they might have.
Sure.
So trauma-informed therapy includes tracking with the somatic symptoms, giving people ways to self-soothe in the sort of nerdy neuroscience way of talking about that. We might say activate their parasympathetic nervous system, which is the part of ourselves that we kind of rest and digest and allows us to calm down. And people with traumatic stress exposure, that can be really hard to access, and kind of counterintuitively, it can cause more anxiety. So it's not uncommon for someone to be taught a relaxation technique, and then they have a panic attack.
Yeah.
Because their nervous system has become accustomed to keeping themselves safe through the process of hypervigilance. So, in other words, traumatic stress is very different because our body works to protect us from perceived threats, even if that threat's not present in the environment. That's sort of the classic example of being triggered, right? Yep. Yeah, so there's some pretty key differences there.
Sure. And with that, survivorship, as you were talking about, a lot of people really struggle well after, clearly because of the impact of the cancer, and just, now you have to go to scans, every 6 months or every year or 5 years. And, just so much anxiety around, oh God, are they going to find something again? Am I going to have to go back through all of this? Or, how do I deal with this new normal? I know, from my brother, he had to deal with colostomy, and, that's completely life-changing in ways, we just didn't expect, and having to really wrap your mind around that. So
that's a really good point. In the sort of literature we call scanxiety.
Okay.
People have this, anxiety before scans, and you're right, it's very common. And this is a really good example of how some of the physiological symptoms can be present. Oftentimes it's sweating under the arms, or their hands are sweating, or their breath is short, because they're super freaked out about what the doctor might find. Because there's really only one thing we ever want the doctor to say, and that is, you have no cancer. That's it. Anything else feels like, a death sentence in some cases, in many, many cases, actually. So And scanxiety is a real thing. It's definitely a real thing.
Well, and you also deal with the minimization. Also, I think a lot of people will minimize their own cancer or their own experience with, well, it's only stage 2. It's not, it's not like I've got stage 4 or, things like that. And well, I understand that. And there's, obviously the difference between, stage 1, 2, 3, 4. At the same time, it's like you don't really want to compete with somebody else for who has the crappier life or diagnosis or things like that.
Oh yeah, no, that's totally right. And oftentimes the staging doesn't matter unless it's terminal. Then people can take a different approach, because then their life is fundamentally changed, and it's likely to end soon.
Sure.
Whereas someone who has the hope of getting through treatment and coming out on the other side, there's a lot of anxiety about what's on the other side. I thought you were actually going to take that in a different way, too. I thought you were going to say that there's sort of a desensitization of the medical community. And that's also something that I've seen a lot. So it's
now you're saying the medical community is sort of calloused and like, oh, your cancer is not that bad because it's stage 1 or stage 2. Is that what you were saying?
I wouldn't say that exactly. But what I would say is that it's easy for us. Well, just because I don't want to throw my colleagues under
anybody under the bus.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Although there are some people like that, and I'm sure there's some people listening that would say like, yep, that's my doctor or that's my nurse. And I'm sorry for that. That's not how it should be. But what is, for us who work in this day to day, it's easy for us to be desensitized, and it's easier for us to have those, especially when we're stressed or we don't get enough sleep or our kids throwing up or are preoccupied or something like that, as humans tend to get, that we might say something flip like that. Well, it's not as bad as the patient I just saw, or you should be grateful for blah, blah, blah. And those things can really lay in that shame we were talking about earlier, because now we're having someone who's basically, we put our life in their hands, telling us that
it's not that big a deal.
Yeah. And it might be the biggest thing that's ever happened to us. What does that person know? So that can happen, unfortunately. And there's a lot of work we do to help undo those things, because the power dynamic that exists in that moment, and then the sort of associated blame, or you should do something differently, you should be someone different, can really lay in there.
Well, and I think even just the sort of systemic trauma of the medical system. And, I've worked with some patients that, the way they received the news caused the trauma to them. I got an email, or I got a voicemail, or, it was this person who, it was like a receptionist. It wasn't my doctor that told me, and they didn't really have any bedside manner. And,
right.
And then also, I think, the cancer patient themselves and the family dealing with they're not an expert in this stuff, and they want somebody else to, make the decisions or tell them you should do this, that kind of thing. And I think a lot of people experience trauma that way as well. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's a really, really important point, that the relationships that we have with our providers make a world of difference. And if we have the same nurse at the infusion center, or the same tech in the radiology lab who's doing our radiation treatments, they get to know us, and they get to know us, and they get to know our demeanor, and they get to know when we're down and when we're fatigued and when we might be having diarrhea, or these things we don't necessarily always want to come out and share,
Sure.
So those relationships are really, really important. And especially those big moments of diagnosis or treatment planning or lab results or scan results. It's okay for people listening. I want them to know that it's okay to say, I want to talk to my doctor. I want to talk to this nurse. I want to talk to this nurse practitioner. I want to talk to this social worker. It's totally okay. You might have to wait, and people might not be happy with you, but it's better than probably going home, riding home in your car or on the bus or whatever, thinking ooh, I just got burned and I have cancer.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that was something my brother and my sister-in-law and his family experienced a lot, and having to advocate for himself and say, like, I want a different nurse, or I want, my cancer nurse, or things like that. And you were talking earlier in terms of like just the initial diagnosis and the shock and denial. Do you work off of any particular model of grief or methodology that way?
We use traditional grief counseling. I mean, I think that oftentimes with the shock moment, grief therapy isn't the right approach, although weaving in some grief therapy for like kind of loss of maybe innocence or what you thought your life might be can be very important. But in those moments when there's shock, it's really about containment. It's about providing a container, a sort of metaphorical container in which someone can go through the emotional cycling process of, oh my God, I'm going to die. Wait, but everything's okay right now. Well, it's just a little lump in my breast, or, oh my God, like I have an apple core thing in my colon, or whatever their case is. Mm-hmm. You can, in those shock moments, it's really sort of crisis intervention. It's really like, let's hold this person together as best we can so that they can really express the stress they're under, let that stress hormones build up in their body and have them expressed. Oftentimes, sort of our species, if you will, sublimates those stress hormones. And that's one big reason why we get traumatic stress response, from the somatic experiencing literature. If a lion is chasing a zebra and the zebra gets away, it like runs, and then it like meets up with its friends, if you will, at the watering hole, right? But that running and that heavy breathing and all of those physiological expressions help process those stress hormones through their body. If we're just sitting there in the chair and the doctor's like, well, you have cancer, if you get up and run out of there, people are going to be like, what's wrong with you? There's enough social pressure not to do that, right? And so that can sort of stunt our actual physiological processing and discharging of the hormones that are generated in that moment. So giving someone a space to be who they need to be, to cry, to wail, to laugh because they don't know what else to do, to like slam the table and scream a little bit. It can be really cathartic, and it can save a lot of trouble down the road. Even though I know this sounds a little bit silly, why am I going to slam my fist on the table? But moving those stress hormones through the body. Yeah, what else are you going to do? It's sort of, and oftentimes the reason why people don't do that is because they fear that if they scare the doctor or the doctor doesn't like them, they're not going to get good treatment. And so they also sort of hide behind the social mores of like, well, let me be courteous and nice and thoughtful, but they literally have just been told they have cancer.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, it's weird as we're talking through. Obviously, I'm kind of going through my own memories of my brother dealing with it, and just things I saw with him and with other patients, in the hospital and things like that. So, wow, okay.
I think on the other side too, with the trauma-informed stuff, I use EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, and I also use neurofeedback, along with some grief therapy and mindfulness meditation and relaxation exercises, the things that we traditionally use to help people reactivate the parasympathetic rest response part of their body and teach them how to self-soothe, how to cope, and then use EMDR, which is a very evidence-based intervention for traumatic stress, to desensitize memories, thoughts, feelings, emotions that are associated with these moments, like, say, the diagnosis moment or the moment when, right before you're going to have a scan, or the moment that, like, the lady in the chair next to you in the infusion center, she doesn't come today. And then you ask the nurse why, and because she died. All these little moments, we can use EMDR. We can also use neurofeedback to help sort of calm the brain down and get it into a place where the neurological rhythms are more adaptive and can be more self-soothing. It can help people shift their emotional states again, instead of sort of being stuck in that triggered state we were talking about. So neurofeedback is more of a cutting edge intervention, but I've seen it to be quite powerful, especially with fatigue and pain and chemo brain and those other side effects that can linger for a long time afterwards.
And can you kind of just unpack the neurofeedback a little bit? Just kind of explain, Cliff's Notes version?
You're listening to OTC episode 36 with Schuyler Cunningham of the Cancer Trauma Project. We'll be right back after a brief word from our sponsor.
Would you like to talk to a counselor but can't find the time? Would you rather talk to someone from the comfort of your own home? If so, Parenting and Family Solutions is here to help. We now offer teletherapy to all clients who reside in the state of Pennsylvania. Using our secure portal, you can have a video session with your counselor using a laptop, desktop computer, or smartphone. Visit our website to learn more at www.parentfamilysolutions.com or give us a call at 717-602-5560 to see if teletherapy might be a good fit for you. Let us help you build a stronger family and a healthier you.
Yeah, neurofeedback's been around for 50, 60 years, and basically the idea is that our brain functions through expressing different electrical activity, and that electrical activity can be measured in a qualitative EEG, and then it can be trained with neurofeedback. Neurofeedback, basically, we put electrodes on your scalp, and that sends the information that the electrical information that your brain is producing back into our computers. Nothing's ever sent into your brain, just to be clear. No shock
It's not ECT. Yeah.
No, it's not ECT or any of that kind of stuff. And then as we set up protocols so that when your brain expresses a certain wave, like say, for example, if you want to get some more soothing, we might work on the alpha wave or the theta wave. Restoration, soothing, ability to state shift. We would we'd set the software up so that when your brain is expressing the waves, the electrical output within the range that we're looking for, the brain gets a reward. And so it's more prone to do that more often. So you can think about this metaphorically in a few ways. Like one, it's like going to the gym for your brain, and we're going to give you the weights that are going to make you stronger. We're not going to give you heavy weights that are going to cause injury, and we're not going to give you weights that are just kind of like not really doing anything. Or you can also think about it like riding a bicycle. As you become to learn where your center of gravity is, your brain is doing all this work to figure out, okay, if I lean a little left, if I lean a little right, here I'm going to be able to stay up. If I don't, I'm going to fall, right?
Yeah.
And if you're teaching if you ever taught your kid how to ride a bike or something, you can't just stand in the background and be like, lean a little left, lean a little right, lean a little left. They're going to be like, Dad, what are you talking about? So it's kind of like that. We sort of get your brain into a place where it figures out, okay, this is a preferred state. This is a preferred state. I'm getting rewarded for doing this. And then the symptoms of anxiety can relieve, pain, fatigue, depressive symptoms, trauma symptoms. And what we're aiming for is this sort of nerdy term called neurotypical, right? Compared to our data sets of what quote unquote neurotypical brain looks like, where there are no symptoms. We're trying to help your brain get back into that space. I hope that wasn't too nerdy.
No. I think that was great. And I always say, I'll put into the show notes. So I'll link to, videos or websites, organizations for EMDR, like, EMDRIA or something like that. And then neurofeedback. And a couple episodes ago, I kind of unpacked EMDR a little bit. And I always say it's one of those ones where you're like, who the heck thought of this first? And like, how did they do this? When they first explained it to that very first client, but obviously today, it is a best practice, especially when you're talking about treating trauma and things like that. So I would definitely encourage any listeners to check it out and look into that if they have a need for it. So.
the right place to go. You can find a therapist that's certified, they have a certification process, that's taken the EMDRIA approved courses. That's very important because there are now derivative courses that are like more information about EMDR, but not teaching and not getting consultation.
Not the nuts and bolts.
Yeah, so those things are really important.
Sure. And in terms of what you're seeing, I mean, I don't know. I've just talked to so many people that I don't know if maybe they missed that part of the treatment plan or they legitimately weren't getting it. But you would think that like every person who is diagnosed with cancer would be like automatically paired with a social worker or, given referrals for treatment. Is that, in your experience, is that not happening, or like, is that a gigantic gap in the system, or what are you seeing?
That should be done, and yes, it's a huge gap. Oftentimes, it's not uncommon for people to go through their cancer process and not see a social worker, not see a chaplain, not see a psychiatric nurse practitioner, not see a health psychologist that can help them through these things. It's not uncommon. It's not uncommon at all, and it's a big problem. In fact, in the national, the NCCN, National Coalition on Cancer, put out standards that the National Cancer Institute endorses for screening people for distress. Anybody who has cancer should screen for distress. Well, I'll tell you that the literature is now reporting only about 50% of National Cancer Institute endorsed cancer clinics are doing that.
Wow, that's mind-blowing.
Yeah, so those folks aren't even getting screened for distress.
Yeah.
And, I think that's nuts. And I did a big research study when I was at NIH where the question was, why just cancer? Why shouldn't we think that anybody in the hospital is having distress? So we did a big study to prove that, and we did show that like people who are there for other reasons also should be screened for distress. Yeah.
Well, and I'm thinking of my own experience of like just going to the primary care doctor now. Like at least at mine, they're giving you like a back anxiety or a back depression. Like those kind of standard screenings. You would think that would just be like automatic, like. Everybody gets this, huh?
I'll tell you a couple. There's some interesting nuances here. So, I agree that everybody should get what they need, whatever that is. If that's a health coach or a chaplain, a social worker, whatever they need. But the other thing that's kind of compelling here is that oftentimes the side effects of treatment will present as mental health conditions, and so it's important to really look through that and parse that out with a well-informed team. In other words. If I were to describe to you these symptoms, difficulty getting out of bed, fatigue, loss of interest in activities, loss of interest in work, withdrawal
depression.
From social, but we might also say, well, that's fatigue from cancer, from chemo, and so so I think that sometimes providers can get mixed up and say, well, we don't want to throw Prozac or Cymbalta at somebody who's also got chemotherapy going on.
Sure.
But it's okay. Like it's okay to use the mental health medicines or the supportive therapies, talk therapies, trauma-informed therapies, spiritual support, recreational therapy, all of these wonderful interventions while they're going through the treatment. I don't see any reason not to do that.
Well, I know from my brother's experience, I mean, I'm trying to remember what it was, whether it was like a care manager. It was basically like a billing manager that kind of helped with the insurance side of things and the billing side of things, which I wasn't familiar with at that point. And I was like, that's genius. Like, I think that's so needed because obviously the financial pressure and like, oh God, how are we going to pay for this? I don't know how to navigate, the meds and the insurance and all that stuff. That's definitely needed. But I was somewhat surprised in clients that I've worked with that they're like, yeah, no, I never talked to anybody. I'm like, really? Like how is that possible?
Yeah, the money stuff is, man, I'm glad you brought that up because there's now we're starting to talk about the financial toxicity of cancer, right? We talk about toxicity as neuropathy or chemo brain fatigue or all these other things that are associated with the treatments. But the financial one can, bankrupt people. And it's very common in the US for people to go bankrupt because of medical expenses. So, what we found is that, and I do this, I can happy to do this all the time, is you really need to advocate for yourself with your insurance companies. They can be the ones that I was meeting with someone earlier today, and she said, well, I was on the phone for 4 hours with my insurance company, and they said, well, the provider needs to call. So then I went to the provider and we called together, and they said, well, I can't help you because you have to talk to the home office, and I'm the outsourced office. And then they get the tech, they get transferred to their tech number, and then it hangs up on them. And 2 hours later, they're looking at each other like, what? This is
ridiculous.
Heck? Yeah. Don't forget, I'm getting treated for a disease, And then the costs are exponential. Getting short-term disability and getting denied for SSDI, Social Security Disability Insurance, can be very common. Or even being there's companies out there that will kind of help you get SSDI, but then take some of your payment in exchange for helping you get it. It's man. And then, if you get me started on things like medical equipment to be delivered to the home, you talk to your physical therapist and they say, well, you need this, or your wound care nurse, and they say you need this bed. And then the insurance company is allowed to provide something that's equivalent
comparable
to that bed. Comparable, exactly. I had a patient once, they needed a gel mattress because she had a stage 4 sacral ulcer, which is very dangerous. It's basically a big hole on her back where there's a wound that's not healing. And the mattress was delivered to the house, and it was sent in a small, it looked like a Jell-O packet. I'm not even joking you. It was like a powder that you were supposed to fill up with water and then put on your bed. And, the husband calls me and he's like, Schuyler, what the,
what are we supposed to do?
You know what, man, let's hammer this out, because this is not good. So, and I'm sure but the colostomy stuff, colostomy supplies, getting the right ones, getting the order numbers, the part numbers, getting the pharmacies that can dispense them, that can get them to you quickly. It's, you need a secretary just to get it all done.
Yeah. Well, and just the idea of the physical and emotional toll, like you said, of spending hours on the phone, the frustration of this is life and death for me. This is not like a hangnail. And, you're dealing with somebody on the other end of the line that, they don't sound like they really care, or, the left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing. I remember, earlier in the podcast season, I talked with Rachel Norman of the Better app, who sadly, tragically, has since passed away, and Better closed up shop. But she talked about a patient that basically he died from not getting his insulin, and that just the not having enough to get the things that you need, or having to fight for it when it seems so obvious that it's why am I having to fight my own insurance company for this kind of stuff?
Yeah, or why am I having to fight my medical team for the medicines I need or the information I need? That's I mean, I've seen not to scare people at all, but I really think that advocating for yourself is essential. And I've seen people come into the clinic, and this is when I was working at NIH. I saw people come into the clinic, and we'd review their case, and we would discover that their previous oncologist was administering medications in the incorrect order. And when you administer chemo cocktails, especially with, say, hematological cancers, the order of the sequence
kind of important.
It's so essential. And so effectively, she had been treated in a way that created a chemo-resistant tumor.
Oh, geez.
So, I don't want to scare people, but I do want to empower people. This is important. This is your life. And this is, and I know some people are listening are going to say, yeah, but Schuyler, I'm also the one with cancer. I just I
don't have time, or I don't have emotion for this.
I don't. And that's why support is just so important. There's no other time to ask for the support you need during a cancer diagnosis.
So you were saying, the support of, getting whatever it is you need. Are there certain things you would say a cancer patient needs, like who should be on the treatment team, or kind of like you were, I would definitely echo you of like, you have to advocate for yourself. And that's some of where, having those supports with family and loved ones, and sometimes delegating to them to advocate for you if you don't have the time or the energy. I don't know, anything specific you would speak to with that?
I would sort of go in a little bit of a different direction to answer that question. And I would
Sure.
say that fundamentally, what we do is it's about truly becoming ourselves. And it's about listening to ourselves. What do we need? What do we need? That's going to be different for every person. So,
Sure.
Someone might really feel safe and secure with the nutritionist on their team so that they're managing the food. Someone might really want an acupuncturist on their team, or a Reiki practitioner, a hypnotherapist on their team. Somebody might want none of that, and they might want an extra pharmacist so they can talk about the ins and outs of the medications and the interactions. They might want psychiatrists. They might want more, a different approach. So I would say that, you're going to get a physician. You might get a sort of, if you're a part of a research institution, or a teaching hospital, you might get some students. It's okay to say, like, I don't want the students in here right now. I don't want them to look at my wound or my breast or my genitals if I have, issues going on there.
Sure.
I would say go for like whatever you need. Really search yourself and allow that to change as you change, right? So maybe you need a nutritionist to help you get on a diet path, and then you realize, okay, I'm good. Now I really want to talk to the chaplain, or now I really, really want to talk to the pharmacist. So, go ahead and just let that process evolve as you go through this process. But ultimately, listen to yourself and stay true to what you know you need. And if you can't get it, then figure out a plan, figure out a workaround, figure out someone that can help you get it.
Man, yeah, like I said, as we're talking, I'm just like the meta, like going through my own stuff and the memories, and try the clinical stuff as well. So, are there other gaps in the system that you're seeing that you would want people to know about?
We've covered the mental health gaps in terms of the difference between regular and trauma-informed care. We've sort of covered some of these financial gaps and health insurance gaps. And some of the intrapersonal issues in terms of asking and seeking for support. I think we've covered a lot, but I think that connecting with other people in group situations can be helpful for some, and some people it's not. Yep. There's a lot of really great national and local organizations that sort of seek to fill these gaps, like the cancer community, the wellness community, Fight CRC, as I mentioned earlier, or like all the ones, all the big ones. I'm not trying to plug anyone per se over another one. But I think that there's so many gaps. We could talk forever about that. But
I'll bring it around to the positive here in a second. But I'm glad you brought that up, though, because like you said, some people are going to want that. They're going to want to connect and get on, Facebook groups or online communities or things like that, and others are not. I remember sitting and talking with my brother at one point, and he used to get very angry because he was just, he felt so beat down physically from everything that he was going through, and he really struggled with that mindset of, the cancer warrior. And he really had a problem with that, because he was like, I don't feel like a warrior. I definitely don't feel like I'm winning. I feel like I'm getting it handed to me. That importance of, for some, connecting with some of those groups and feeling like you were able to talk to somebody else that's going through it and kind of knows what you're dealing with. That was really important to him, more in an individual setting than a group setting. He found one or two people from childhood or high school friends or things like that he connected with.
said, those can be lifesavers for some people, and for some people those can be torturous because they're just talking about all the things that are about to happen to you that are happening to someone else right now, and it's brutal. That can be brutal. So yeah, again, stick to what you need. What you need is okay. Yep. And getting what you need is is probably the biggest effort, because on the back end you want to know, even if you're on your deathbed, you want to know, I was true to myself, and I worked to get what I needed, and and here I am today, and I can be proud of that, even if I'm going to pass away. Uh-huh. That's a legacy you might want to leave for your providers, for your family, for those who come after you. Like, okay, well, even if he died, even if she died, I really admire that she just went after it. She went for exactly what she needed, and I know it wasn't pretty, and I know it wasn't easy, but but she stuck to her guns, or he stuck to his guns. And those sort of things leave lasting impressions. These can be peak life experiences for people. And coming out on the other end, thinking about who you want to be, not just what you went through, but who you were, who you want to be, can really change the mind state and say, like, okay, well, I want to be a loving person. How am I supposed to do that with cancer? I want to be the best dad I can. How am I supposed to do that with cancer? Sure. So, those are sort of really essential things to be thinking about too.
Definitely. And just that idea of like one of those, great equalizers, the idea of like, it just really changes your whole mind state, kind of like you were saying. And I believe, if I remember correctly, I think Payne Stewart, the golfer, went through something like that, like where it just really changed who he was as a husband and a father and a person. I know I've heard things like that about different people, but yeah, that's really important, really focusing on who you want to be. So yeah, like I was saying, let's kind of jump to the positives. What are the success stories? What are some of the great things you've seen come out of this work?
Man, I think this is the reason why I do it. People will say, like, how do you do this every day? It sounds terrible, right? But this is the thing, is that even small changes in people's lives where they feel more who they are, where they feel more engaged in the world, they feel connected, that's what it's all about. It's all about these moments, not necessarily because they live. This happens in people who die all the time too, is that moment of healing in a family, that moment of healing in oneself, or, okay, maybe I'm not as bad as I think I am, and I'm getting through this, and I'm doing the best I can. I've done, some absolutely beautiful EMDR sessions where we're talking about the most painful, traumatic things someone went through on their cancer journey. And at the end, they're saying, even though I went through all that, I kind of have this sense that I can hear the angels singing my name.
Wow.
I'm starting to get like a little teary when I say that kind of stuff. And because that not only changes their life, it changes my life, and it changes the people around them. And that kind of hope, that kind of inspiration, that's what I'm in it for. The warrior thing, the fighter thing, I can respect that too. And what really gets me in my heart is when you see these shifts and people just feel like, I'm a human, I belong here, and it's okay who I am. Despite all this nonsense, despite all these tumors or this disease or this, I have no more hair, I have no more breasts, I have no more colon or whatever. Those are the moments that are just like pure joy. And I think that's one of the reasons that draws me to hearing people's stories. It's because then I get to hear those life transformative things, or I get to hear people say, I know that's in me and I need help finding it. And then I'm like, let's do this. This is what I'm here for.
Yeah.
So, even if it's hard or ugly, whatever, I'm in. And I think those are the things that keep a lot of us who work in the cancer world in the game. Otherwise, we would just be devastated.
Oh, sure, yeah.
So frequently, yeah.
Well, and it made me think of just the specific niche of working with cancer. Of that's for some people some of the lowest points. And as a therapist, I would think just the honor and the privilege to be able to walk with somebody through that is just, it doesn't get any more, I don't know, vulnerable than that to me. So I could really see where it's so huge. Yeah.
Sessions where someone's made a big change in their life, and then we just look at each other for 30 seconds. Or, I went to a Quaker college, so I'm actually very, very comfortable with silence, and I can sit there for hours. So, those silent moments where we just sort of, I'm getting a little teary again, but we just sort of look at each other and a little smile breaks, and it's like, you good? Yeah, I'm good. All right. See you next week. Those things are like, that's it, man. That's it.
Yeah. So at the beginning, you mentioned, specific certification in oncological social work. Can you kind of speak to, okay, if I'm, I don't know, I'm in Colorado or I'm in, Texas or wherever, what should I be looking for? What certifications and licensure type of, traits should I be looking for if I want to find a particular therapist or social worker?
So if you want to find a mental health professional, obviously you want to find someone, you have to find someone who's licensed in your jurisdiction.
Yeah.
So that, whatever that is, a psychologist or a psychiatric nurse practitioner, a social worker, or a licensed professional counselor, the list goes on. So you want someone that's licensed because that they're regulated and they've gone through all the steps. But then I would look for someone who has experience treating people with medical conditions, and who know what it's like to talk to doctors, know what it's like to be in the chaotic milieu of a hospital or of an infusion center, of a surgical center, a radiation center, all these things. And you want someone, I think, who has trauma-informed training. So, obviously, if we're talking sort of Rolls-Royce version here, we're talking someone with like a certification in somatic experiencing, trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy, EMDR, as we spoke about before. And ideally, that person would also be an oncology social worker. But there are very few oncology social workers across the board right now. So if you go looking for one, you might not find one. And don't be mad at me, because I'm also telling you that they're not a ton out there. It's a growing certification.
Yeah.
But EMDR people, they're out there. They're out there, and you can go on Psychology Today. You can go on therapyden.com. You can go on your health insurance, mental health provider list. Look for people who are certified in a trauma-informed intervention and who have behavioral medicine or experience working with people who have illness. And, it's fun. It's not fun, actually, because being on both sides, seeking mental health care myself from time to time, it's like, man, it's stressful. People don't call you back. They list they list every single certification and every population and every technique under the sun, and I don't even know what some of that stuff means.
Yep.
So it's a bit of a slog too to find somebody. It can be for sure.
I've done, blog and podcast episodes on this, and I kind of talk about it like it's, online therapeutic dating. You're like, swipe left, swipe right, like, does this person have a picture or what, and yeah, you alluded to the alphabet soup of, what the heck is, EMDR or, some of these things. And trying to really, dig into it and find that. So in terms of people finding you, we had said earlier, but just to repeat it for the listeners, the cancertrauma.com is the Cancer Trauma Project website, and they can email you, they can, reach out through the contact form. How are there other things that people should be looking for from you and from the Cancer Trauma Project in the coming year in 2020?
Working on publishing some stories, so that's coming up. Man, I'm putting myself on the hook by saying this stuff out loud, right?
That's right.
But, yeah. So we've been working with some writers and working to publish some stories, and that project is time consuming and slow because we want to get it right.
Okay.
If we can drum up the energy and time, we'd like to also put those stories into recordings and release them as well. So, we're looking for stories. We listen to stories, and we provide the mental health care. So definitely for, any kind of consult, I'd be happy to talk to people and just point them in the right direction.
Definitely.
So yeah, mental health care is, one of the big things we do as well, and be more than happy to help people that are looking for care, especially in the Washington, D.C. area.
Sure.
And then otherwise you can, go back to the hospital that you got treated at and ask for resources. See, they usually have provider lists or referral lists of people that can provide extra mental health care that's outside the hospital if you want that too.
Okay. Well, Schuyler, thank you so much for taking time to be on the show. The work that you do is amazing. I could just hear the passion in your voice as you were talking about, some of those shared moments. So, obviously, as we were saying during the episode, that huge gap in the system. So thankfully, you're doing something to make a dent in that and try to bridge that gap. So again, thank you so much.
I love this work. It fills my soul.
Awesome. Man, I look forward to keeping in touch with you, definitely, and seeing what you do with some of the recordings and the stories in 2020 and checking back in with you. So thanks for being on today. I hope you have a great holiday for 2019 and good luck with the new year in 2020.
Thanks so much for having me.
And there you have it, folks. Another episode in the books. As always, thank you so much for tuning in. I can't appreciate the listeners enough. You all make this project possible, so thank you so much. If you happen to have somebody in your life that is dealing with a cancer diagnosis, that they're walking through that right now, I would definitely recommend reaching out to Schuyler at the Cancer Trauma Project. So that's just the cancertrauma.com, or the number to call is 202-570-7795. Schuyler is more than willing to talk with people and if not help them himself, be able to point them in the right direction. So I would really recommend passing that on to people if you know that they're dealing with that. Because like we said in the episode, it's just, there's so many different layers to it. It's such a huge thing. And oftentimes we put that on the back burner. We kind of think of like, oh yeah, I'll deal with this once I get through the cancer, or once I get to this point, or things like that. And or sometimes even just I can't deal with that. I can't look at that. And so often I talk with people about being able to deal with it, finding support for that throughout is huge. It actually adds charge to your battery life, so to speak, so that you're able to deal with some of the other stuff. You have to have outlets for some of these things, and at the Cancer Trauma Project, they definitely understand and have dealt with a lot of this. So it's a really good outlet. I would highly recommend it. Well, take care, and I hope you all are doing well and staying safe. Next up will be OTC episode 37, where I will be speaking with Mike Michalowicz, author of Profit First and Fix This Next, along with special guest Casey Compton of Consulting with KC. If you liked what you heard, be sure to subscribe and review wherever you're catching this podcast at. You can check out detailed show notes and archived episodes at www.pfsonthecouch.com. If you want to stay up to date on future guests and contribute questions, be sure to follow us on your favorite social media platforms. The author and host of this podcast is not engaged in a therapeutic relationship with the listener and cannot give counseling advice without a confidential appointment. Listeners should be sure to consult with a licensed therapist in their area or seek emergency medical attention if they are experiencing psychological difficulty. A special thanks to the band The Topsy-Turvies for the show theme song. Their song, Like a Living Dead, can be found at topsyturvies.bandcamp.com. The bump interview track was the song 1973 by Bruno E. The author and host of this podcast is John Dennis. Special thanks to editor and show producer Trevor Groff.